Hello everyone and welcome to another video on how to find equilibrium price and quantity when we are provided with inverse supply and demand functions. So in our previous video, we looked at something fairly similar, but we were given regular demand and supply functions. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below, and I'd highly recommend you to watch that video before seeing this one. Okay, without further ado, let us begin today's video. Let us start by first understanding the difference between the normal demand and supply functions and the inverse form of these functions. Okay, so we have here a normal demand function and a normal supply function written over here. This is the normal demand function and this is the normal supply function. Okay then, what we analyze from this is that Q over here is expressed in terms of P. This is the same for both the demand and supply functions. Another important point to note is that since the demand curve is downward sloping, the coefficient associated with P is going to be a negative value. But what about the supply function? The supply function has a positive coefficient of 5 associated with the P. So the main takeaway point is that the normal form of demand and supply functions always has the Q, quantity, being expressed in terms of P. If you are given two different functions and you need to figure out which one is the demand function and which is the supply function, just take note that the demand function will have a negative coefficient associated with the value of P. That is if we are looking at the normal form of demand functions. But for the supply functions, we will have a positive coefficient associated with P. Now let us look at the inverse form. Now in the inverse form, one key difference is that our P over here is expressed in terms of Q. That is the same for both the demand and supply function in the inverse form. P expressed in terms of Q. And the same finding holds that the demand function is negatively sloped, downward sloping. So we have a negative coefficient associated with the Q. But the supply function, the inverse supply function, is upward sloping. So we have a positive coefficient associated with the Q. So again, the key point is that the inverse form of demand and supply functions always have the price, P, expressed in terms of Q. Alright then, now that we have understood this, let us move on to solving a question when we are given the inverse form. Now this particular question, question 1, is the same question which I solved in the previous video. And these two are the normal form of demand and supply functions. Now today I am going to show you that if we were given the inverse form instead of this regular form, we are going to be obtaining the same answer of P is equal to 8 and Q is equal to 52. So let us try to solve and get that answer. Now I'm going to start by copying down my equations over here, right? Because I will need this to express it in terms of inverse form. So this will be a practice of how you can express the regular function in terms of inverse. So let us start with the demand function. So we're given here that Q is equal to 100 minus 6p. Let us change this to the inverse form. So we know now in the inverse that P has to be expressed as Q. So let us rewrite this as 6p will be equal to 100 minus Q, and P will be 100 divided by 6 minus Q divided by 6. And this now is the inverse demand function. I'm going to label it as inverse DD. Let us do the similar thing for the supply function. We're going to have that 3p is equal to Q minus 28, and P is going to be Q divided by 3 minus 28 divided by 3. All right, let me just check that once more. 3p, Q minus 28, P is Q divided by 3 minus 28 divided by 3. Okay, and this is going to be our inverse supply function. Now taking these two functions, let us solve for this question as if we were given this in the beginning. I'm going to paste these two functions here. Here's my demand, and this is my supply. So imagine now that we started off with a question looking like this. Given the inverse demand and inverse supply curve, and we have to solve for our equilibrium price and quantity. So let us begin. Now, similarly to what we learned in the previous video, we equated the quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Now, in this case, let us equate the price, since the price associated with the demand curve and the price associated with the supply curve has to be the same at equilibrium. As such, we can equate 100 divided by 6 minus Q divided by 6 will be equal to Q divided by 3 minus 28 divided by 3. Let us calculate these values. So we're going to get half Q is equal to 26. And Q therefore is going to be 26 times 2. 26 times 2 is 52. Now that we have obtained the value of Q, let us solve for the value of P. Let us just substitute the value of Q into the demand, inverse demand function. So I'm going to get 100 divided by 6 minus 52 divided by 6. And that is going to give me 8. And therefore, I have obtained that P is equal to $8 and Q is equal to 52. And this is the exact same answer as this over here. So what this proves is, regardless of whether you are given the inverse demand function inverse supply function, or you're given the regular forms of demand and supply function, what you need to understand is both will yield the same answer. Okay, so given the inverse demand and supply function, just follow the same steps that I showed you today and also in my previous video in order to solve for such questions. Okay then, I hope this video was helpful for you, and if you did find this useful, do remember to like, share and subscribe, and thanks for watching.